Welcome back, everybody. It is the Shoal Weekly Podcast. I'm your host, Joe, and I'm joined by Ben and Charlie. Guys, it is great to be back. I hope you both had a really great summer. Of course, today we are joined by a very special guest star, Lillian Crawford, writer for Little White Lies, Sight and Sound magazine, film critic, and most crucially for our season premiere, Lillian is an avid Wachowski sister fan. Lily, it's great to have you on the show. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi, it's lovely to be here.
Thank you. Yeah, before we get into conversation, of course, we need to give a huge shout out to our listeners. Season 3 is finally on the go after a bit of a delay. But all throughout autumn, we're going to be bringing you a really big blockbuster lineup of reviews. So if you're new here, do be sure to follow our socials for updates and news. Hit the notification bell, drop us a like or a follow, as we always appreciate the support. If you have been with us since the start, thanks for tuning in into what I think is going to be a really fantastic season. I mean, essentially, we're marking the start of a new era of cinema, really, a return to cinema, much better than last year's Tenet, which was kind of like, yeah, come back to the cinema, but not really. So over the next 3 months, yeah, exactly. Over the next 3 months, you can definitely look forward to reviews of Denis Villeneuve's Dune, Marvel's Eternals. We're also going to look back over the Matrix trilogy in hot anticipation of the 4th installment. There's so much to look forward to, so please stay tuned. And of course, today Lily is joining us to initiate our season of Wachowski sister filmography, so to speak. Lily, The Matrix Resurrections is only a few months away, but today you chose Jupiter Ascending from 2015 as our film of the week. I'm really excited to talk about it, but just before we get into that, I know Charlie has been very excited to have you on the show. As our resident film studies graduate, we often find that Chaz is a bit of devil's advocate on the show. Would you agree, Chaz?
Yeah, gotta be, haven't you?
Yeah.
Keep it interesting.
Especially, to me and Ben, for sure, I think.
Yeah, about Marvel films.
Yeah, but I actually get the feeling that today, Chaz, you may be meeting your match with our guests. Yeah. I've had quite a good time looking over some of your Letterboxd ratings, Lily. And
oh goodness!
On that note, I think a great icebreaker would be we can have a look at some of your Letterboxd ratings, and I think we're really excited to hear some of your more divisive opinions on some very famous pop culture movies out there. I mean, of course, you are here to defend Jupiter Ascending, which was one of the biggest flops of the 2010s. But obviously more on that later, but I just want to run a few ratings by you, if that's okay. And I would love for you, I would love for you just to give some context to them, in as many words as you like. And I'm going to start with one of my favorite films, which is Whiplash, which according to your Letterboxd profile, you gave 2 stars to. I wonder if you have anything to talk about.
That's changed quite considerably. I think when I first saw that film, I thought it was a masterpiece and absolutely adored it. And I revisited it a few years ago, and I just found, I think the first time I saw it, I thought it was really condoning the bullying behavior, and the second time I watched it, I thought it was really endorsing it, and I found it incredibly uncomfortable because he goes on to do the great solo at the end, and it's like, but it's sort of saying that the way that Fletcher bullies him is sort of bringing out this great performance, and I found that very uncomfortable. I mean, I think it's a fantastically made film, and the soundtrack is incredible. That's more a sort of personal issue with that film rather than a technical one, I'd say.
Is that something you've experienced in your own life? That kind of harsh criticism that has forced you into that uncomfortable place?
Yeah, I mean, I was definitely bullied a lot as a child, and I have PTSD, so actually, like, watching stuff like that is really quite harrowing.
Welcome to the club. You're in the right place.
Right. Lovely. We can have a support network here. It's all good.
Yeah.
Shoal is a very safe space where we can talk about films that we hate, that bring out the worst of our emotions.
It's interesting that you pick that one because it's one of the films that perhaps I can't sort of like really be quite venomous against. Yeah, it's one that I've sort of changed in my opinion of over time.
That's really fascinating.
Also, I watched it the day after Birdman, and I absolutely love Birdman. That's a really great film.
Yeah, so good.
So yeah, I think sometimes when you watch a film so close to something that you really loved, it can often make it seem worse than perhaps it would if you watched it in isolation.
Ben, were there any of Lily's ratings on and criticisms on Letterboxd that you found either that you agreed with that not a lot of people do, or were there some that you just completely disagree with?
So let's start with the first part of that. Let's start with ones that I secretly agree with a little bit with.
Oh, interesting.
Now, so first of all, I just love Marvel films. So Black Widow never usually gets as high as 4 stars. So I'm gonna take that, and I'll agree with that
film.
one. Yeah, I thought it was great. Okay, so this one I probably wouldn't be as harsh as you've been, but
people often say that to me.
so the Revenant, you gave it 1 star. Now that is that is way too low. But I do think that the Revenant sometimes gets overhyped because obviously DiCaprio won his Oscar with it, and Tom Hardy was incredible in it as well. But I did think that
Tom Hardy was in that. I honestly
was it Tom Hardy?
No,
yeah. I believe Lily was making a joke.
That's a bad joke. I think it's one of those films that I've sort of tried to erase from my mind because I found the experience of suffering it so mind-numbing. I mean, as I just said, I really loved Birdman, and then watching Revenant was just so.
It was
dull.
a bit of a long film, wasn't it? It was a bit of a slow burner in places. So I think I would secretly agree with dishing it a little bit, but maybe not quite as damaging as 1 star. But
also, I'm like a sort of ardent animal rights person and vegan, and there's some real animal cruelty and disgusting stuff in that film.
That's true. Yeah, doesn't DiCaprio eats like a real heart or something?
Like a raw, wasn't
which
it?
I just sort of reject on a moral level. Yeah,
I mean, there is an argument. There is an argument to say though, if you were stranded in, in a snowy avalanche wilderness, I can't even remember.
Yes, but it's a film, Ben.
Yeah.
It's not real, mate.
It's based off true events.
Yeah,
yeah.
Could do like what they did in Cruella and have like CG Dalmatians, which I think is perhaps a step too far. But,
I watched that recently. It's very like disorientating having the dogs all CG. Yeah, it's
like
weird.
not even good CG.
Yeah.
Makes you realize how hard CG is to do, actually.
Well, if anyone doesn't have an excuse, it's Disney. They can afford good CGI.
It's true, but it does make you appreciate good CGI just that little bit more.
It's like
I still think that CGI peaked in Dead Man's Chest in Pirates of the Caribbean.
Oh, I think it peaked in Revenge of the Sith, but that's just my personal.
I was going to say that.
That's
no, Dead Man's Chest was phenomenal. The motion capture work on Bill Nighy for Davy Jones it still hasn't, that kind of motion capture really hasn't been matched. Perhaps maybe Thanos. But
I thought Ben was going to say Avatar.
Yeah.
Well, I mean,
there's
I'm not going to lie.
Ben loves Avatar, Lily.
I wasn't going to bring it up. I wasn't going to bring it up for exactly this reason. But a lot of the stuff they did in Avatar, like the tech they made, is still used and was used for those films because it was just top tier.
It's one of the. I mean, in the same way that I often think that films are often we talk about the technical side of films when it's just a bad film. So The Revenant was one that was talked about a lot in terms of its use of natural lighting and Lubetsky's cinematography and so on. And it's like, but the film itself was incredibly dull. And The Avatar's another one where yes, it's incredibly impressive as a work of art, but it's just dire to sit through.
That's what
I
me and
think,
Joe thought as well.
yeah, absolutely. It's the most
And
derivative film I've ever seen.
The fact that we've got 4 more of them on the way is not.
Ben's going to
filling
be
me
in a
with great
tent outside
excitement.
our local Odeon cinema. He's going to be camping out.
I don't think you'll need to. Surely it doesn't have that many fans.
Brilliant. Moving on.
Good.
Before Ben leaves the podcast for good, and we
Sorry.
never get him back.
Avatar has its merits. The James Horner score is perfectly good.
That's a great save. That was a great save. Well done. Bravo. Charlie, was there a rating of Lily's that struck a chord with you when you were looking over?
Probably know the answer, mate. It's Psycho at like 0.5 star.
Yeah.
I'm guessing. I know it's not a feminist masterpiece, but
No,
it's Psycho.
It's you know, it's this. It's one. I had a sort of an epiphany moment when I was doing my master's in film, and I was like, I don't have to say I like films just because everyone else likes them anymore. And I just went on a rampage against a load of films, and Psycho was one of them, because it's a film that I just hate on every conceivable level, in terms of its twist and the portrayal of mental illness in that film. And I just think it's an incredibly stupid and quite dangerous film that's had a long-lasting impact. But that's just me. It's interesting. You've picked films that I've sort of forgotten, but I gave such low ratings to.
What can I say? We do our research.
Well, you clearly do. I stand by them. I mean, the one that I sort of got. I mean, my Letterboxd ratings, thankfully, are sort of tucked away where no one can see them. I got into a bit of hot water with the Suicide Squad recently. I gave it quite a damning review. So at least you're not sort of calling me an ignorant slut in multiple different languages.
Which Suicide Squad did you bash?
The Suicide Squad, the new one.
The new one.
Oh, no.
Yeah. And I sort of had to mute Twitter for a couple of weeks.
Oh dear, really?
Yeah, because it had 100% on Rotten Tomatoes. My review pulled it down to 96, and people were not.
I love that.
That's some pull.
And that, to our listeners, is why we were so excited to have Lily on the show. What a powerful presence you have in the film critic industry. It's fantastic. I think on the note that you made about films that portray mental illness in a damaging way, my final rating that quite surprised me was Ari Aster's Midsommar, which you also gave just one lonely star to. What is that? Again, is that because of the aforementioned thing that it was quite a damaging film, or is it more to do with the representation of the characters? Because I know a lot of people love how powerful Florence Pugh's character is, but a lot of people actually see her as a very weak character and not represented in the way that she could have been. But I just, if you have some context for your rating, that would be great.
I just think I found it a 3-hour dirge. I really liked Hereditary. And I think that because Hereditary is one of those films where the experience of watching it is really quite special to me. I went along to a screening of Hereditary and found that I was the only person in the cinema.
That must have been terrifying.
And I had to debate with myself whether I could go through with it or not. But I was like, nah, I've paid £12 for a ticket. I'm going to sit this out, and was bloody terrified. And Midsommar, I watched in perhaps the opposite of that. I watched it on my laptop in my room at uni. I was just so bored. And it's kind of laughably bad at the end when she's like the colourful slug in the flowers, and she's just running
colourful
around.
Slug. I love that.
She looks like she looks like Roz from Monsters Inc. I just no. I'm afraid I don't have anything much. I wish I had sort of a really deep moral issue with that film, but
No,
I just
that's
really,
okay. Sometimes you just see
it's
a film and you just hate it,
well,
and you
yeah,
just
exactly. And the horror's one that I have quite a complicated relationship with. I can absolutely love a horror film or absolutely hate it. I don't
Mhm.
normally feel in the middle with it. Because a horror film has one job, and that's to be unsettling. If
Yeah.
I'm not unsettled by it, then as far as I'm concerned, it's failed as a film. I normally only watch horror films in October, so I'm quite looking forward to October because
It's
I will
funny that
just
you should
watch
say that
horror
because we
films for the whole
were
month.
we were planning on doing a sort of horror festival, but with the amount of huge movies that are coming out this quarter, we just wouldn't have had time for it. But horror,
Yeah,
you're preaching to the choir
there's
here. There's
so many films coming
Yeah.
out. It's
So
crazy.
obviously we're prioritizing those. I'm very excited for things like Dune and the Eternals, but I'm kind of gutted that I had to say goodbye to this sort of this baby that I had in my mind for over a year now. Like we were planning these festivals as far back as sort of November time, and I remember really wanting to do a Halloween festival, and horror is my favorite genre, hands down.
Yeah.
So I was really interested to hear your thoughts on Hereditary and Midsommar. And had we have done that festival, it would have been great to have you back on the show for that. But we got to make way for all the $1 million movies that are
Yeah. Well,
going to get us
there'll
lots
be
of
time.
views. Yeah,
It will even out again. We've got so many films that have sort of been pushed back and back. I mean, we've got a new Bond film this week. I've spent my weekend sort of rewatching the Daniel Craig Bond films,
Nice.
which is good fun because I haven't actually watched all four of them sort of back to back before.
Favorite one?
Casino Royale is probably my favorite Bond film.
That's the correct answer. That is the correct.
It's a very good one, but License to Kill may actually pip it for me as my favorite Bond, but certainly my favorite of the Craig films. It's Casino Royale.
We did Skyfall, didn't we? Not recently.
We did do Skyfall as part of our British Film Festival. We wanted to look at some of the best of the British Film Institute industry, whatever you want to call it. And we did have a good time looking at Skyfall. And we were actually planning on doing a Daniel Craig marathon retrospective, but with the new film out next week, I think we're just very keen to do a review of that. So for our listeners at home, our next week's episode will be on No Time to Die. Been pushed back, but expect that review this time next week. I'm very excited to see it in the cinema at the weekend. So that was a great dive into your Letterboxd ratings. I wish we could just talk about your entire diary on Letterboxd, but I think we would be here for ages, and I think Ben will end up crying.
I think I already am.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, Ben gets it from us. He gets enough from us. He knows what he's getting into. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So, obviously, our film of the week is Jupiter Ascending, and obviously, there are some very obvious opinions about the film that are kind of ingrained in recent film history. But I'm glad that you chose something so unexpected today, and I think it's kind of worked out so perfectly with the Wachowskis essentially making their big return to cinema. I know it's only one sister, but there is this kind of feeling that wow, the masters of early 2000s cinema are coming back at the end of this year, and so I was really, really happy that you actually decided to look at one of their films. I think my first question to you about Jupiter Ascending is why do you defend
why?
it?
Just why?
Just why?
Like I said, there are some very obvious opinions about the film. It was one of the biggest bombs of the 2010s, both critically and financially. And when we reached out to you to join the show, you immediately suggested Jupiter Ascending, and because you, in your words, you said you were one of its sort of ardent defenders. You're probably the only one. And so that really fascinates me because, well, so far your ratings, your criticisms of other films are so divisive. I'm not surprised that you defend Jupiter Ascending, but I want to know why. I think that's the crucial the question. So
Yeah.
take it away.
Yeah. So as you say, the fourth Matrix film is on its way, and I've been incredibly excited for ages because I absolutely love the Wachowskis. I love all of their films, and I think that Sense8, which they did for Netflix, is just incredible. So I was thinking of which one. So I definitely decided I wanted to talk about a Wachowski's film. I was like, which one would be most interesting to have a discussion about? I was going to go with Bound because it's one of the sort of lesser seen ones, but I think you've nailed it. That Jupiter Ascending is sort of this enigma for me in terms of why people don't vibe with it, and why people don't love it, because it's a film that I didn't see in the cinema when it came out, because as you said, it bombed and wasn't out for very long. It was one I'd only watched for the first time a couple of years ago. And since then, I've seen it about 5 times. And every time I sort of see things that I didn't spot before, because it's so layered and it's so... Everything in it is original. It's not pulling from anything else. It's all very much sort of creating its own world. I mean, it's inspired by a number of different things. So it sort of has the Alice in Wonderland theme that Wachowski's put into the Matrix, and it's got this sort of Homeric Odyssey type through line of the character arc of Mila Kunis, which her performance in itself is something that I absolutely love about this film. The fact that you've got such a great ordinary heroine in the lead who is suddenly sort of chosen to have this remarkable thing happen to her. And more than anything else, it's just the campest blockbuster in the world. It's everything about it is high camp, and I think that it won a Razzie. It won Eddie Redmayne won the Razzie for his performance as Bela Mabrasux, and I honestly think it's one of the best performances in the history of film.
Really? And you're not saying that ironically or anything?
I'm not.
Wow.
I mean, in the same way that we would say that something like Joan Crawford in Mummy Dearest is one of the greatest performances, because it's one of those performances where someone has so completely committed to the bit, and it's so over the top in an absolutely gorgeous way. Ridiculous way, yeah. But it's so entertaining to watch, and it's intentional. It's all intentional. You know, there's one of the best moments in the film is when he sort of stands out and he says, "I create life and I destroy it," and it's just brilliant. It's just one of the best tonal shifts because it comes out of nowhere. He just his performance constantly just like goes up to 11. And then comes back down again. I love it.
Wasn't this the same year that he won? Sorry, Ben. I was just going to say, wasn't this the same year that he won the best actor for The Theory of Everything as well?
Yes.
That's incredibly difficult to wrap my head around. Ben, what were you going to say?
I think he's very bad in Theory of Everything, and I think he's very good in this. But maybe I'm just a contrarian.
I thought he was just a bit all over the place. Like it wasn't. It's like 1 minute he was kind of, what's it called? It's not. Is it matricide? Because he killed his mum, right? That's basically right. the takes you like 30 minutes to figure out what they're actually fighting about, and you realize he's killed his mum. He was just all over the place. It was like he was reading from like 2 different scripts for the same character. It's just like you said, like 1 minute he was going off on these like kind of crazy points, and it was like up to 11, and the next minute it was like, well, he's a bit of a bad villain. Like it's just not really. He never really like sold it to me as being like, oh, you can really carry this film. I don't know. It just was quite confusing, just in terms of like like you said, they did a lot of world building, and I would agree with you. The world building was incredible. It was a bit like what was that other film? The other sci-fi, kind of similar. Was it Valerian, the Cara Delevingne one that was out recently?
Yes, yeah.
Luc Besson, Valerian and City of a Thousand Planets.
Exactly, like a huge amount of world building went into it, and it was really fascinating. Like I mean, I think me and Joe especially were absolute sci-fi buffs, so we will love any kind of film like that.
Mhm.
But and it just felt like the script just kind of let it down. Like there was this huge world and this huge idea that they just kind of created, and they just kind of solved it inside of an hour. And it was just like they kind of like, for me, it just kind of let down all that the kind of world building they'd done. And I just really didn't like his performance because I thought he just was kind of he contributed to that. Like it just kind of, I mean, as an actor, I can't fault him. Like you said, he delivered it well. But if that's what they were after, he did it perfectly. But I think for me, the script of what he was trying to do as a character was just a bit flawed.
It's that sort of decade-old question of, is this the direction of the actor or of the director? And you can use Hayden Christensen, say in Star Wars, in the Star Wars prequel trilogy, and say that, well, was he told by George Lucas to act like he was a machine, or is that just Hayden Christensen's performance? And so,
See, I think that's another remarkable performance.
I do too. Thank you for saying that. I do too.
Yeah, it is extraordinary. You know, like the sand line is very similar to that one I just quoted from that Balaam has. It's these moments that are just so surreal in the campest possible way that just, I don't know, they just feel very entertaining to me. And
yeah.
maybe I love Hayden Christensen's Anakin so much because Jake Lloyd's Anakin is so absolutely catastrophic. So there is a sort of shift in
Hayden Christensen's just amazing. That's that we can just
Yeah.
put a line under that there.
I think he is.
I do.
I'm glad that you agree on at least on that point.
What was that film he did with Nicolas Cage? The Crusader one. That was sick.
I can't remember the name of that.
Season of the Witch?
That's it. There we go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Encyclopedic knowledge there.
There, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think these are all some great points, and I think yeah, in the case of Eddie Redmayne, it was just, I imagine one of the Wachowskis was just like, there is an idea of this character. There is not a direction. There is an idea of this character, and you can take this idea to whichever direction you would like, and roll with it. And here's your Razzie in advance. So yeah, I think you are making some quite difficult to disagree with points about the film, and I'm glad that we haven't just sat here and gone, yes, but it's terrible, and well, no, it's not. We're getting to essentially how you make a film, and I definitely think the Wachowskis are these high concept directors, and they constantly try to be original, and if it doesn't work, they take it on the chin. And we can look at even Cloud Atlas for that. Cloud Atlas was another really high concept film and story, obviously based on a book, so there was source material there to help, but it was kind of it was divisive as well, and didn't make as much money as it should have done. And it makes me excited for The Matrix 4, but it also makes me really, really scared. Because if there hasn't been a unanimously good Wachowski film since, say, the second Matrix, arguably, then like one that we can all agree on.
Speed Racer. Speed Racer is surely undeniably a masterpiece.
Oh, my apologies. My apologies.
No, you're right, and I think that Cloud Atlas certainly has more defenders on my side than Jupiter Ascending does. But it's so great to see, like, they start off with something very small like Bound, and then they do The Matrix, which everyone sort of loves and has gone through quite a few stages of reappraisal and reconsideration and understanding, invited by the Wachowskis as they've sort of progressed in their careers, and then they sort of get bigger and bigger and bigger. So Cloud Atlas is like these multiple different timelines, and then Jupiter Ascending is interplanetary, and Sense8 is the biggest of them all because it's across the globe. And I'm looking forward to a new Matrix film, but I do understand Lily Wachowski's reasons for not doing it. It's like, well, we did that, and I don't want to go back to that. I feel like I'm going backwards. Whereas I also get why Lana Wachowski's doing it, because I think she wants to go back to sort of making films that everyone really enjoys, as you say.
I think it's more of a personal reason as well for Lily, in that obviously the original Matrix trilogy was pre-transition for the sisters, and of course I feel as though Lily's reasons I not relate to, obviously, in any way, shape, or form. I'm not going to pretend to be in anyone else's shoes, but when you read that she doesn't want to come back because it was a time when she was a completely different person, and I believe that they lost their parents as well.
That's right.
So I do feel like some of the films that you've spoken about, that you've given 1 stars to, that making a film is also an emotional experience that can bring up things for not just audience members, but the people that make them as well. So how do you think The Matrix 4 is going to fare with just being Lana directing on her own?
Well, Lana has done quite a lot on her own. She did the second series of Sense8 pretty much, with just her and David Mitchell, who's also doing who wrote Cloud Atlas and has also written the new Matrix film with her, which gives me sort of high hopes for it. And I think she's extraordinarily talented and has this ability to sort of conceive on a scale which very few other filmmakers are capable of doing without sort of tying themselves up in knots. I mean, what you were saying about the script of Jupiter Ascending, I suppose that is the criticism that's sort of leveled against it, is that it does feel a bit knotty, like it doesn't quite work, and sometimes it sort of steps on its own feet, which I can see that there are moments in the plot which perhaps don't entirely make sense or seem to go back on something that was said in an earlier scene. Although I think you just have to go along with it, and then that requires a certain level of sort of distancing. The new Matrix film looks... Yeah, sorry, go on.
I was just going to say, I think that sums up most of the Wachowski's films, is that you just got to go with it. Don't try and understand it, just feel it. Quite like The Matrix.
Yeah. And at the same time, there's something very rewarding of trying to spot those things and going back and like Cloud Atlas is such a great film adaptation because it manages to do exactly what David Mitchell does in the book, which is to have all of these very subtle through lines and sort of connections between the different storylines and sort of how timelines intersect. And they do that visually, which causes problems for them in terms of racial casting and sort of makeup that gets used in that film is problematic. You can kind of see why they're doing it, because they want to draw these connections between the timelines in a way that you have to do very differently on a screen to how you can do it in a book. Which is why I think it's probably a good thing that they're doing another Matrix, because I think that I've learned an awful lot from making those films, and they've had to be careful because they're not getting that level of money thrown at them anymore. Sense8 was cancelled after 2 seasons, and because they just kept trying to grow it, and Netflix said we can't keep paying $9 million an episode or something.
Yeah.
And it was only going up. So, Jupiter Ascending lost an extraordinary amount of money.
I dread to think.
Hundreds of millions, I believe.
Yeah.
So, you can understand why it must be hard for them to get sort of studio backing for big projects. I mean, if they went back to doing something like Bound, they'd probably get the money for it quite easily, but I don't think they want to do anything like that again. And have you seen the trailer for Resurrections?
I have. I've watched it probably about 100 times, trying to pause every frame.
Is that the one you sent me, Joe, where it's different every time you click on it?
That was the teaser. That was
Oh,
the
right.
That was the
marketing, like the
teaser.
night before,
That was the
which was
teaser for the
fantastic.
trailer.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was
Wow.
great.
No, there's one. I mean, I have a huge theory about the plot for Matrix 4, which I won't go
Ooh,
into.
let me hear it. Oh, okay.
Maybe I'll send it to you privately on Twitter.
Okay.
But there is one shot in the trailer which really, really gets my theory brain like dialed up to 100. There's a shot where the SWAT team is coming into this theater, and it's a blink and you'll miss it shot. You really got to pause the YouTube video, and being projected on the cinema screen is the first Matrix movie. And I have so many thoughts, but we'll have to revisit them when we do
It's
our
a very
Matrix.
Matrix thing to do, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that'll be a sort of literalization of the Plato allegory of the cave that they sort of explore in the first film.
Absolutely, yeah.
And you know, this is what's really fascinating about this film to me is that, you know, the first one is in the same way that they sort of did with Speed Racer and Jupiter Ascending and in Sense8, is that like there's an element of choice to going down the rabbit hole. And what this film seems to be saying is, what if for once someone in a film did the thing that they're really not supposed to do, which is to say no and to take the blue pill and to end it and to sort of block that experience, which obviously has sort of, you know, the pills have this sort of fairly obvious connection to sort of hormone therapy and blue pills to sort of blockers and I think it's interesting to sort of to see, well, why would you choose the blue pill? What when you could have this sort of this experience, and the film is really going to look at a side to these films that they haven't delved into before. Because that's the thing. It's like you go along for the ride with their films, and this seems to be a film that's sort of starting from the starting point of, well, what if you decided never to get on board? And how bloody dull the world would be if you didn't.
And I think that brings me to a fascinating thought, one that probably Charlie will be able to articulate in a question much better than I can. But I think one thing I'm worried about with the Matrix 4 is it becoming like this franchise, this huge franchise thing that people I think are going to miss the point of the story. I think obviously Lana's going to be clearly putting her heart and soul into the story of the Matrix 4, and it's I think there's definitely going to be a lot of contemporary commentary on gender identity. 100%. I'd be disappointed if they weren't. But I think with how big and loud the film is going to be, I'm worried that people aren't going to get the point. And I think, Charlie, you have a question here about Lily's writing. I'm not sure if you want to articulate it better than I can, but it's sort of to do with like the canon of film.
Oh, yeah. Because he wrote for Little White Lies, and it was about like re-establishing the film canon to a more, I suppose, equal representation of gender and sexuality and all that. But my argument, I gave it a quick read earlier, and I was like, will it not just do that naturally over time anyway? Do you not think? Will it not change as films change?
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, I think that in terms of what the canon will look like in the future, yes, it will change. I mean, it's more about sort of, that piece was more asking why people have been sort of left out in the past. So like from the very birth of cinema, like a filmmaker like Alice Guy Blaché, why did it take so long for us to realize that she was one of the sort of founding members of cinema? Well, it was because she'd just been sort of excluded from the history books almost. But I think you're right, and I think it's going to be really fascinating seeing the Sight and Sound next year, because I think it's going to look completely different. Because the last 10 years since 2012 has seen an absolute boom in the number of non-cis straight male filmmakers, and I think that's going to have to. My only fear is that people will still vote for like really old films and not want to vote for stuff that's come out within the last 10 years. So it might take a bit
Yeah.
longer than just next year. But there's so many films that came out since 2012 which are just absolute top tier brilliant films.
Yeah.
Portrait of a Lady on Fire is probably the most
that's really
obvious
good.
one.
Yeah.
But I think I'm sure will be quite high up on the list.
I mean, it should be. It's a very sight and sound film as well, isn't it? Like,
yeah, definitely.
they love that sort of stuff.
And I think what else has changed in the last 10 years is an awful lot more of the films I was talking about, the things that perhaps more people aren't aware of, have become so much more available. Like, and obviously we don't have Criterion Channel over here yet, but there's loads of stuff being done by Criterion that's been restored, and BFI's done loads of restorations and stuff. And there are just so many more films that are accessible that most people hadn't really even heard of before. So I think it will change. We're not going to see any Wachowski films on that list yet, I fear. As great as The Matrix is, and
so yeah, the Matrix might have a shot.
I think there's a certain snobbishness in film criticism that you can't
really.
You can't rate like a blockbuster on the same level as, like, I don't know, a Bresson film or whatever, and it's just like, of course you can. There are
apart from Marvel though.
Yeah, well, Marvel's a fascinating one. I mean,
now we have Chloe Zhao, who's going to be directing the Eternals, and the trailers for that are stunning. Obviously, you can't judge an entire film off a trailer, but
have you seen Shang-Chi?
I have seen Shang-Chi. I thought it was Mulan on crack. It was fantastic.
That's a really good way of putting it.
Yeah, it was wonderful, and I wasn't expecting the amount of fantasy and magic that was presented in it. I know.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. Ben, have you seen Shang-Chi yet?
I've not seen it, but I've seen that kind of snippets and stuff.
Yeah.
And obviously, there was quite a lot of. Ironically, there was quite a lot of press about there not being a lot of press for the film, because obviously Disney didn't really push it, did they? It was an experiment, and
I think they expected it to do better in China than it would do over here. And
but no, it did very well.
It's one of those. In the same way that I was sort of saying about why I love Jupiter Ascending, it's such a refreshing thing in Marvel to start afresh with a new character, especially one who's like coming from quite humble beginnings. Like, obviously Jupiter is like cleaning toilets and stuff, and
but Jupiter's that's like a lottery, though, isn't it? Like, that's literally like blind genetic lottery, like the whole concept of the film.
That's true.
Yeah.
Whereas, I suppose it's the same. It's the same in this film in terms of, like,
it's true. But he had to like work for it and train for it, didn't he? Like, it wasn't just like.
True. Well, Awkwafina's character sort of just ends up in it, and they're like doing sort of driving the cars around to the car park or whatever, and I just find those sorts of stories so much more compelling than like the sort of, I mean, I guess you're right, there is a sort of hereditary aspect to it, but it's not privilege that's sort of always been there. It's just like, oh, this has suddenly befallen quite an ordinary person, in the same way that Neo ends up inside the Matrix, or I just find those stories so much more compelling.
I think that's a really interesting point. And I think that's probably why I really enjoyed Shang-Chi, is that it like you said before about the Matrix, the upcoming Matrix 4, it's clearly going to be a film about, what if Neo decided to take the blue pill and not be involved. These films that we enjoy, they seem to all have a common theme in that there's a choice. There's always a choice. And that makes me wonder if Jupiter Ascending would have been more successful if it had been released, say, in the past year or so, as opposed to 2015 at sort of the height of that sort of formulaic, episodic Marvel DC ping pong that they were going back and forwards over all the time. To see something like that, say, during the pandemic or just before, it makes me wonder. We've had that a lot on the show, where we've looked at films and we've gone, this is a great film released at the wrong time.
We did it with Dread, didn't we?
We did, yeah.
Yeah.
Have you
Yeah.
seen Dread, Lily?
Oh, that's one I was really quite young when that came out, I think.
Yeah.
So
Very, very bloody.
I definitely wouldn't have gone to see it at the cinema, and it's
No.
not one because it's an interesting film in that it's sort of been forgotten, although it was one that was quite praised when it came out. So I'm surprised that it's not one that's perhaps pushed by Netflix a bit more or whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's interesting you saying that about Jupiter Ascending, because I almost wonder if its humor feels very sort of like Marvel Phase 3, and
Yeah.
whereas I feel like there was definitely a time in sort of like the early 2010s when these big blockbusters had to be really serious and dark and weren't allowed to have a sense of humor. And I almost wonder if something as camp as Jupiter Ascending is, and with its very specific sense of humor about like bees and dogs and so on, which people often laugh at rather than with, and which I find confusing because to me it's so intentionally funny. I almost wonder if you're right, if maybe Jupiter Ascending coming out at the same time as, I don't know, Thor Ragnarok or something like that, like a big, bold, colourful sort of silly sci-fi film that clearly isn't taking itself too seriously. I almost wonder if audience tastes have changed so much, even
without a doubt,
quite a short space of time. Which is why I think I was a bit. Maybe this is why I enjoyed Black Widow so much, was because I sort of worried that it was going to be sort of reviving Phase 1 of Marvel, which I very much sort of would like us to move on from, because as I say, it was very sort of serious and grey, and Black Widow felt like a better balance of what had sort of been done before and what we enjoy now. I mean, Shang-Chi is probably one of the funnier Marvel films. I really enjoyed it a lot. And Eternals, there's a lot of humor in the trailer. I mean, this is the main thing that I look for in a Marvel film. I don't care so much about like the CGI and the big battle scenes or whatever. I just like characters and sort of banter that they share. I mean, that's why Infinity War was so highly enjoyable. Maybe why I didn't enjoy Endgame quite so much, because it sort of distanced everyone again.
Yeah. I think I can agree with that.
I loved how like they sort of put completely unlikely characters together, and the Wachowskis like to do that too. They like to take people from completely different backgrounds and with different sensibilities and sort of see how they desolate on screen, which is often very funny. I think Mila Kunis and Channing Tatum have wonderful chemistry on screen despite being quite different, and then they throw Sean Bean into it, and it's just it's just very funny to me.
I was so surprised that Sean Bean didn't die.
Yeah. I was waiting for the death scene.
It's so the sort of film where you expect Sean Bean to die and then he doesn't. You're like, what?
Those shoes that Channing Tatum has as well, I couldn't get on board with them. He was like skating in the air.
Oh,
like,
yeah,
man.
What
is that?
Fact about those shoes.
Go on.
He'd had to lose his wings, so he had to fly somehow.
Yeah.
So
he could have done it a better way.
Those shoes were actually roller skates, and they just CG'd them out. So he did all the stunts on roller skates, which is why it looks like he's on roller skates.
Right.
Because he quite literally is, and they just basically like. I mean, I haven't seen a picture of it, but I'm just guessing they just styled the top half of the roller skate to look like it did in the show, and then they just painted all the wheels green or something, and then just like chopped it out or something at the end. But yeah, quite funny.
I just asked, did all three of you hate this film?
Yeah.
I didn't hate it.
No,
that's a harsh word.
Yeah,
no, I'm asking because part of the reason I wanted to do this because I showed it to my boyfriend for the first time this year, and he absolutely loved it like I did. So I haven't actually spoken to many people who did dislike it, but I know people do dislike it. So it was one of the main reasons why I wanted to talk about it, because I'm hopefully going to be writing on it at some point soon, and writing about the Wachowskis a fair bit in the build up to the new film. And I just wanted to know why people don't like it. But you've sort of answered that question.
Yeah.
I think I would say I enjoyed it from the fact that I will pretty much enjoy 95% of the films I enjoy. Like, it was, if you get in the moment of it, a bit like what you were saying like earlier with kind of Eddie Redmayne's performance, you can kind of sit there and enjoy it. And so from that perspective, I kind of got into it. But then when I kind of started to compare it a little bit and pull it apart a little bit, that's where it fell down slightly for me, just because it was like they did so much. There was so much cool stuff in there that it just like kind of didn't really like kind of come through with that. Like all the ships and the tech, even the fact that he had, these kind of 26th century roller skates or whatever the hell they were, and like there's so much cool things. Then it was like,
I think sci-fi has gotten to the point now where sci-fi used to be about breaking the rules and breaking the mold. Look at something like 2001: Space Odyssey, and then you have Star Wars, and then Alien decided to throw horror in, and sci-fi for such a long time was this ruleless genre, and now it 100% has rules, and it has things that people are used to seeing in sci-fi, and if those things aren't there, it's unsettling. And that's why for me, I always think sci-fi will always be maybe my second or third favorite genre behind horror, because horror still to this day has no rules, and if anything is out of place in horror, it's unsettling, and that's good. Mission failed successfully. But with sci-fi, that there's all these rules now, and we have the MCU to blame for that. We have Christopher Nolan with his huge sci-fi spectacles to blame for that. And in part we do also have the Wachowskis to blame for that. We maybe blame's the wrong word. Maybe I shouldn't say that, but there's all these rules now, clearly, and I think Jupiter Ascending really tried to break those rules, but it came out at a time, as you said, when Marvel films were dark, and the DC films were even darker, and then we had just had Interstellar and Inception, and the new Star Wars movie was on its way the same year. So I think Jupiter Ascending had so much to live up to, and I think maybe we've reached a sort of unanimous decision that it maybe came out at the wrong time.
Yeah, no, it's interesting saying that Star Wars was coming out that year and bending the rules, because I mean, if there's a film that absolutely sticks to its guns and doesn't break a single rule, it's Star Wars: The Force Awakens.
Yeah.
If I hear the word hope in a Star Wars film one more time, I'm gonna lose it.
I mean, it's quite a literal retreading. Yeah. I think Last Jedi did break those rules, and that's why it faced so much backlash. And then that's why we get something utterly diabolical in Rise of Skywalker, because
worst film ever.
Bad.
Because fan servicing is very real, and when a big studio like that and directors pay too much attention to it, then they decide to play it safe to the point where
cash grab. That's what it was.
Well, exactly. Whereas love or hate Last Jedi, it's something completely different. You can't say that it's just they've just done exactly the same thing.
Another Star Wars.
Yeah, you can't say that it was just like doing the same thing that Empire did. Yeah.
To me, The Last Jedi is a film in three acts, and the first two acts are clearly directed by Rian Johnson. They're his vision, it's his script, it's his words, and the final act is directed by Disney. And the switch between 2 and 3 comes right at the moment where Kylo Ren is extending his hand out to Rey and begging her to let the Jedi and the Sith die and to let something else grow in its place. And I was like, yes, this is brilliant. This is so inventive. Like, Star Wars is evolving. Finally, it's growing up. It's maturing. And then Rey says no. And then they go to a planet, have a good old shootout. There's a lot of hope being thrown around. And whoop-de-doo, Rey is now the Last Jedi, I guess. And
Star Wars died.
Star Wars died right at that end of that act too. It wasn't Rise of Skywalker that killed Star Wars. It was that moment where Disney decided, okay, Ryan, you need to stop there. We're going to finish the film for you.
Yeah, and I definitely think that the Wachowskis knowingly owe a lot to Star Wars in terms of what I was saying about person from humble beginnings. It's the Luke Skywalker origin story all over again. But it's kind of done in a very different way to what George Lucas was trying to do. It's more complicated than light versus dark in this film.
Yeah, no, I think you're right, and I think also you got to remember that George Lucas took inspiration from Dune, which is going to be a huge blockbuster very, very soon. I'm so excited to see it. I
was meant to see it. When was it? Last week. I finally, because I've been pestering press people to let me see it, because I interviewed Hans Zimmer earlier in the year for Little White Lies.
Nice.
Of course, yeah. Congratulations on that. That was a huge piece.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That was really fun to do. It was I was kind of overwhelmed when I was asked to do that. I was like, what, really?
Is he a nice bloke? Yeah.
Oh, he's lovely. He was so wonderful to interview. And I was like, oh, great. When am I seeing the film? And they were like, well, you're not going to see the film. And I was like, well, how am I going to ask him about his score to Dune if I haven't seen Dune? So I went along to what was, they were like, oh, we've got a preview in Leicester Square. So I went along. And by preview, they meant the first 10 minutes of the film.
Yeah.
Oh, no.
So I saw the first 10 minutes in an IMAX, and then it ended. So I was supposed to go and see it last week.
The biggest tease ever.
Exactly, and I'd completely got the date wrong, and I'd come up from Kent to London, and it was the next day. So I still didn't get to see Dune. So by the time I finally do see the film, I do hope I enjoy it. I've only heard great things. So
I've thankfully just reached I've just reached the part in the book where I know the film ends. So no spoilers now for me with the book. Very excited to see that. And on that note, I think going back, Star Wars definitely took a lot of inspiration from Dune as well. And then, like you said, the Wachowskis took so much of that kind of humble beginnings origin story from Star Wars, which was taken from Dune, but then also Paul Atreides is this, prince.
He's a privileged little git.
Yeah, yes. He really annoys me. Like from what I've seen of the trailers, Timothée Chalamet plays him in quite a toned down way, but in the book he's a shit. But
Timothée Chalamet's a shit, so maybe he's well cast.
Well said. I think that is a great place to end it. Timothée Chalamet is a shit. Lily, it has been so great to have you
it's been wonderful
on the show.
Thank you.
Of course, if you are game, we would love to have you back to talk about The Matrix Resurrections when that drops in December.
That'd be amazing. I'd love to. I'm not going to stop talking about it. So
perfect. Yeah, hopefully we'll figure something out. Listeners at home, if you've enjoyed listening to Lily talk, obviously please go give her a follow on Twitter. We'll post her when we post the episode. She posts some great stuff. Go check out some of her material with Little White Lies. It's all good. And yeah, what can I say? Again, thank you so much for coming. I know we tried to organize this for August, but it got pushed back. And I think, all good things come to those who wait. Really excited to see what you think about Matrix 4 and Dune as well. We'll definitely keep in touch. And next week, we are going to be looking at No Time to Die. The movie is out this weekend. So if you can, go to the cinema, check it out, and then come back next week and listen to us talk about it. But today, obviously, we've been talking about Jupiter Ascending. I feel like my mind has been changed a little bit. I still don't think it's a great movie, like from my own experience of it, but you made some really great points. And I hope our listeners also don't go away and bash the movie as well, because at the end of the day, we're all part of the same industry, and it's a job for thousands of people. So, thank you so much for being with us today. This has been the Shoal Weekly Podcast. It's been Joe, Ben, and Charlie, and we will be back next week for another episode. Take care. Bye bye.